Hi, everybody. We're going to get started. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. Good evening. I am Dr. Beth Regalbuto. I am Superintendent of the Southern Berkshire Regional School District, and I'm so happy to see so many people here and with us on Zoom today. I want to let those who are at home know that on the website we have uploaded tonight's presentations, and they are attached to the agenda for tonight's meeting, so you can get those as well. Thank you to our National Honor Society students. They came out tonight and to provide childcare for anybody who might need it, or for me right after this. Also, there's snacks and handouts out in the way in if you missed them on your way by. So we'd love for you to sign in so we know who is here, okay? So we started these community conversations with the superintendent, and we have made them joint with the school committee for the last 4 or 5. And we started them 3 or 4 years ago as an opportunity to really engage and know our community better. It's the school committee meetings are really the business of the school committee, and we really can't have back and forth dialogue. So we've been doing these conversations, and I personally, I'll speak for myself, have found them to be incredibly powerful and meaningful. So I feel like we have a better idea of what you want, and we have given you the opportunity to tell us what you want for your students and your community going forward. So with that said, thank you again, and I will introduce Bonnie Silvers, Chair of the School Committee.
Thank you, Beth. I am going to take attendance of the school committee because declaring it an official school committee meeting. And that's one of the things I wanted to say. Don't wait through a whole presentation. If you can't hear, raise your hand. Kim Alcantara? No. Kyle Bartlett is here. Art Pataki is here. Jim DePisa? No. Sarah Pollack is here. Dennis Sears is here. Carl Stewart is here. David Rogers Terrio is here. Nancy Worthington. She's great. Kim is here. Make an entrance. So I'm officially declaring that this school committee, because we have a quorum, is open. I just want you to know that the purpose of this meeting is different from a lot of the others. For those of you who may not know, the Regional School District Planning Board last evening passed the regional agreement, which sets off the 30-day period for then voting on a warrant. At this point, the purpose of our meeting is really to have you ask questions and also decide on what future homework you're going to do to make an educated decision. I think it is rare that we have the opportunity to shape our future in the way that we have with this regional agreement. And it's imperative that you not rely on somebody else to translate it for you, that you go through the regional agreement. To that end, we have 2 main presenters today. Our attorney, Josh Coleman, and his firm that has guided us throughout this process and asked many questions related to the regional agreement and now the warrant. And Josh will be presenting first. What we will do is, after his presentation, there will be a 10-minute period for you to ask questions only related to his legal presentation. We may not get through all of them in the 10 minutes, but we will have a second open period for questions and answers. Following that, Renee Wood, who has picked apart this regional agreement and probably asked more questions than anybody in the whole 8 towns, is presenting the, not line by line, but the details related to the regional agreement and questions for you to ask. And she has also a PowerPoint presentation on that. At the end of her presentation, again, we will have a 10-minute period for questions and answers. At the same time, our Mount Everett principal will be monitoring those on Zoom so that we can capture the questions they may have. And also, we have the benefit, I'm really pleased, of the number of people who have already submitted questions online. We won't get all of the answers today, but we will hopefully have a number. In addition, the head of the Regional Planning Board, Regional School District Planning Board, Lucy Prashker, our chairperson, is here tonight, along with our project manager, Jake Eberwein. They requested to co-present this evening. That was not the vote of the Southern Berkshire Regional School Committee. So therefore, I am basically bound by the motion that we took. To let you know, for those of you who are from Southern Berkshire, which I see most of you are, we as a school committee have not taken a vote to either endorse or to reject the regional planning agreement. We have individual opinions. You can ask us our opinions, but we are speaking not for the whole school committee. With the advantage of Lucy being here and Jake is, one, we know they will catch us on any open issues. 2, they will be holding another meeting here in the TACPAC on the 11th of October. So we will have additional information, and they will present the information on the 11th. All right, so based upon last night's vote, we now have our 30-day period. Most every town has elected to vote on October 23rd at 6 o'clock. It will be done as a regular town meeting. Every vote will have to be recorded. This is not a case of early voting. This is not a case of mail-in voting. This is to be present. At this point, we have 6, Lucy, towns that have agreed to 6 o'clock. We have 6 of the 8 towns have agreed to 6 o'clock on the 23rd. So you mark it on your calendars. You have to be here in person. For Sheffield, it's right here. Other towns will be letting you know where their meeting is taking place. With that, I am going to let you know that it is imperative. We've got both a Zoom setup and a CTSB setup. So when you come up to speak, be very careful of not rattling things, because it will be picked up all over the place. And we'll get a signal if people are not heard. I am pleased at this point to introduce our attorney and his law firm, Josh Coleman. Thank you very much. Get ready to be informed.
Thank you, Bonnie. Thank you for inviting me, the school committee, Superintendent School. So I'm here tonight, and as well with me is one of my colleagues, Nancy Campney, who assisted with preparing the presentations tonight. Obviously, I think this copy is made for you. heard, or do I need to speak louder? Bonnie?
The question was, have all of the towns been notified of yesterday's vote and that the 30-day period has begun? Jake will respond on behalf of our planning board.
So I'm just going to answer the question and just customize it a little bit. Have we officially notified the towns? And the answer is no. So we'll be sending the recommendation report and the final regional agreement either tonight or tomorrow, probably by noon. Thank you.
Okay. Is that better, folks? I saw at least one hand, so I'll take that as a yes. All right, thank you again for having me. Like I said, myself and my colleague Nancy Campany are both here tonight to answer questions, provide a presentation. One of the things that we've been asked to do by the Regional School District Board, and obviously myself and maybe the Planning Board have different views or questions on certain issues, so I'm sure that'll come up. But what does the regional agreement mean, and what does the warrant article mean? And what are you actually voting on when your when your town meetings happen in the next 30 days? Because there's a lot of things that, as I think Lucy Prasker described in one of the issues, is that, it's a governance document for the formation of a new district. There are lots of things from a big picture level that are addressed in the second phase, or I guess I'd call it the third phase. The Regional School District Planning Board voted last night. There's an 8-town vote. And then you get to the third phase, assuming that is a successful vote, which is the transition committee. So I just kind of wanted to lay that out as kind of a framework for the discussion. Chris, you're going to advance my slides, I believe, so I can't see what slide you're on, unfortunately. But you could go to the topic slide, is slide 1. Great. So the topics I'm going to cover tonight are the summary of the warrant article, a brief overview, and this is not an exhaustive list. What's the impact of a yes or no vote at town meeting? What is the role of the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education? What is the role of the Transition Committee? Briefly discuss some of the practical impacts of staffing and collective bargaining, and open questions. So, timeline of events. So next slide, please. So the timeline of events. Next slide. Great. Is as Bonnie just mentioned, as you know, there was a 16-5 vote last night. The Regional School District Planning Board voted to approve the final agreement that they worked with DESE, with Jake and Lucy have worked with DESE over the last few years on what's commonly referred to as the 8-town regional agreement. Copies are available on the 8 Towns website. The school committee has made copies available tonight. That is, in my view, kind of the master. There's a lot of information out there, but that is the master document. And that is really what you want to take a look at, is a really good resource to understand what it is and what it is not. The first step in that process is all 8 towns must hold a town meeting on the warrant article proposing the new school district within 30 days, no later than October 26th. I believe 6 towns have already scheduled it for October 23rd, and 2 towns are still figuring out when it would be scheduled. So those are dates you want to look forward to and be mindful of, especially in the next 30 days, and there'll be some upcoming community forums. Next slide. So this gets very confusing, so I'm going to try to boil this down as Nancy and I did in going through this. So for the proposed new regional school district of the 8 towns, which I'm sure, I don't live in Western Mass, I'm from New Jersey, but I live in Massachusetts. Each of the 8 towns listed have to approve the warrant article at a town meeting by the majority of eligible voters. And then that means, well, what does the warrant article mean? So the warrant article on its face looks fairly simple. The warrant article authorizes, and copies of the last iteration of the warrant article, which have to be approved individually by each of the member towns and the town moderator and town council to go on the warrant. subject to their own bylaws, requires that, next slide please, that each of the towns have to approve the formation of the regional school district, the operation of a new district. And by doing that, you are in essence approving the terms of the regional agreement, which is the governance of how to agree, how it has like 16 different elements to it, from the setup of the committee, the members of the committee, lease of property, budget, transportation, admission of towns, withdrawal of towns, amendment of the agreement. It's a pretty complicated document. It's something like 30 pages, single-spaced. But that is in essence what you are approving. You are approving, a yes vote means you are approving the renew, and I noticed there was a new PowerPoint up today on the town's website, approving the formation of the new regional school district. However, it also has some important contingencies in it. Next slide, please. There's contingencies in it, which means at a future date, at a future town meeting, at a date to be determined, there needs to be one of the contingencies of building, as I understand it, to build have a new regional school district. One of the proposals that Berkshire Hills put forth several years ago is to build a new high school in Great Barrington. And that requires the approval of debt, or the borrowing of monies to fund the school. Obviously, there's an organization called the MSBA, the National Building Authority, that funds part of the school, but then the rest of that price tag is left up to the 8 towns. So at a subsequent date, there will be a second vote to authorize the borrowing of the money. If that contingency does, so let me just stop there. So the first primary vote is the vote of the 8 towns. If the 8 towns do not vote to pass the agreement, there is no regional school district in the current formation. And I'll get to it in a moment. I'm sure the planning board has some different ideas on this. But in essence, the new regional school district of the 8 towns is not formed. But I also want to emphasize those contingencies, because the cost of the new high school, which I'm sure some of you want to know, there's projected costs on the website. Those aren't accurate costs in my view at this moment, because there is no actual hardline cost, especially in rising construction costs. That is one special important contingency. 2 sound a little more formulaic, but they're equally important, is the Regional School District Planning Board, in consultation with DESE, decided they also need special legislation passed in order to form this new district, which requires A, the transfers of all assets and liabilities of the 2 regional school districts to the new regional school district entity, and B, authorize the termination and dissolution of the 2 regional school districts without any further action. So currently, to make it, try to simplify it, each district has its own regional agreement, which has provisions on withdrawal. Neither school district agreement, I represent one of them, has provisions on dissolution. So my understanding is, based on my conversations with DESE's regional school district office, is that they thought special legislation is needed to dissolve the district. So those are all contingencies. There was also a third contingency, which I've been told by the school district planning board, at least from my understanding in conversations with them. And next slide, please, is a contingency to basically expand what's called the transition period. The current transition period would have to be completed to July 1 of 2025. That's per the current DESE regulations, which gives you basically up to 18 months. They proposed also legislation to extend the transition period an additional year to July 1 of 26. My understanding from the Regional School District Planning Board is that that is optional. It gives them greater flexibility, but is not critical. But that is another contingency and other legislation that is in the process of being filed. But to go back for a minute, what happens if any of the 8 towns does not approve the merger? My understanding is that the issue could be referred back to the Regional School District Planning Board, which could come up with a new configuration with less than 8 towns, redo the assessment formulas, and determine if there's sufficient funding to fund a new district, look at the savings and all those types of issues. They would have to submit a new proposed agreement to the member towns towns at that point. There would have to be a new vote, in my opinion, of the regional school district planning board, and ultimately it requires the approval of what's commonly called as DESI. The other option is the plans to merge the two school districts could be terminated or suspended, and the regional school district planning board could be dissolved. I mean, the issue could be, in essence, from a non-legal perspective, dead on arrival. So those are all options. So the next 30 days, as Bonnie said, are really critical because that is the next important vote in the process. And that is why they're having all these informational sessions so people can get additional information. Next slide, please. I just want to talk briefly about the roles of the various entities involved. And this is a very brief summary. One, DESI has already, as I understood it, approved the agreement. That DESI is not voting specifically on whether or not they think the regional school district is a good idea or not. They may have opinions on regionalization, but they are ensuring compliance with the statute, the regulations, but there's nothing illegal in the provisions. And ultimately, it has to be approved by the DESI commissioner, which would only happen after the 8-town vote scheduled in the next month. But I do want to clarify, it's not a recommendation on the advisability of specific terms and provisions in the agreement. That is the decision that was made by the regional school district planning board, the 21-member board. There's another committee involved, which actually has 2 stages. That in the event the 8 towns pass the agreement, at all 8 towns, they would then establish what is called a transition committee. Next slide, please. Next, please. The transition committee would consist of 11 members appointed by the boards of selectmen of the member towns. It is a proportional representation. It's not one town, one vote. It's based on, as I understand it, populations, student might be some other factors. So Great Barrington would have 3 members, Sheffield would have 2 members, and the other 6 towns would each have 1 member. It could be some members who are part of the current committee, it could be a different formation, that's all to be determined. And there's actually 2 steps of setting up a transition committee now and an elected committee in, I believe it's November of 24. What is the role of the transition committee, assuming the 8 towns vote to approve this, subject to those contingencies? So they have many roles. My understanding from DESI and from my brief conversations with the planning board is that the focus is on the new building project, which is, next slide, Chris, please, which is one of the issues. They also have the authority to hire personnel. That includes a new superintendent for the new district, new chief financial officer or business manager, which is required by state law, a new director for special education, the power to contract and purchase goods and services, negotiate collective bargaining agreements. I'll come back to that in a little bit, which will take effect on what's called the operational date. That is the date the new district goes into existence, whether that's July 1 of 25 or July of 26. There are many other issues outlined in that I'd encourage you to look at because it's pretty broad, their powers. The role of the transition committee, it's spelled out in section 14 of the agreement. It's also spelled out in the state law. One of the open questions, as I understand it, as some of you may know, the Regional School District Planning Board, I think the estimated cost to date are in the $500,000 range. One of the open questions is what is going to be the cost of how to fund the new transition committee, funding, hiring of services, purchasing services, hiring staff, and all the other. And these are just a few of the powers that they have. So I just want to highlight that in a very brief level. Next slide, please. Again, I've sort of already touched upon this as the operational date in terms of a timeline of events, which is coming up fairly quick. One would be July of 25. If special legislation is extended and approved, the new district would now become operational to July 1 of 26. I just want to clarify, operational date has nothing to do with when a new building, if there is debt funding, if debt incurrence is approved at a subsequent town meeting. My speculation is a new building would not be until probably, I'm going to guess, typically based on the MSBA project, 5 years, would be well after July 1 of, or at some date after July 1 of 26. And I talked about, this piece of the legislation already. Next slide, please. So one of the issues is, as you may know, all the teachers are unionized in both Southern Berkshire and Berkshire Hills. One of the, what I would call a misconception, or maybe needs clarification, is the issues are what happens with all the staff. Do they keep their jobs? Do they not keep their jobs? Do they get a guaranteed raise? Do they not get a guaranteed raise? And I guess I would point out just a few things on this. And, my specialty is labor law, so I'm pretty well versed in this area, is that wages are a mandatory subject to bargaining. They need to be bargained with the two unions. So right now, you have two different teachers' contracts. You also have other unionized workforces like custodians, paraprofessionals. There's no guarantee that everyone gets the higher of the benefits. You can't actually, by state law, unilaterally increase benefits. It has to be negotiated. So currently, as I understand it, the estimate that's been thrown out there is that there's roughly a 6% differential in pay in Berkshire Hill teachers making 6% more than Southern Berkshire. That would all need to be negotiated. That includes health insurance, wages, benefits. So the health insurance rates are different, for example. Southern Berkshire, I believe, is 80-20 contribution employer-employee. Berkshire Hills is 50-50. Those are all issues that need to be negotiated. In terms of staffing, this is a little bit of speculation, I think, on a lot of people's part, but the statute clearly states in 71, section 42B, only teachers with professional teacher status, that means you've worked in a district 3 consecutive years or you've been given what's called PTS status early, have employment rights. Every other position could be continued, could be consolidated, could be a reorg, there could be reductions in force or layoffs, and those are issues all to be determined at a later date. They will need to evaluate staffing, but there is no statutory protection for these positions. That all needs to be negotiated. So when there's discussions and questions on the chart of staffing, a lot of that, in my view, is speculative because it has to be determined at a later date. And that's what an important point to clarify. If you are voting in favor of a regional agreement, that does not mean that you are voting on all these other issues. You are voting on a governance structure to form a new district. You're voting subsequently to incur debt, the special legislation on some other aspects. But a lot of other issues are to be determined at a later date. So I think I want to draw that important point again. You need to clarify what you are actually voting on and what you're not voting on. You're not voting on the curriculum of the new school. You're not voting on the current vocational programs. I mean, those may be benefits that could be obtained, and there's different viewpoints on that of a new district. But those are not things, you're not voting on transportation and what travel times are. Those are all issues to be determined at a later date. Obviously, there's already been feasibility studies on some of these issues. There's a lot of information on the 8 Towns website, what's projected. But again, those aren't things that are guarantees. Those all need to be further worked out. Next slide, please. The funding of the new school. So I guess I would say a few things about this. It's a pretty complicated formula. I've tried to briefly summarize it, but on the 8 Towns website and in the original agreement, there is a greater description that gets into the weeds. But for purposes of this, basically, if the MSBA, and they are still, as I understand it, in the feasibility study, agrees to fund the new high school, the split of the cost of the new high school would be 90% paid by the Berkshire Hill member towns and 10% paid by the Southern Berkshire towns. I want to clarify, this is a 90-10 split. However, MSBA funds a large part of the project, so that would likely reduce Southern Berkshire's percentage a little bit from 10 to, there's a chart on the 8 Towns website to 4, and it would reduce, I forget exactly the number, it would reduce the number at 90% of the Berkshire Hills a little bit. But Berkshire Hills, under the chart and under the funding formula, would receive a far greater share of the MSD reimbursement. So in actuality, the split is not 90-10. There's some other funding contingencies that I'm not going to get into. It's kind of complicated, but I encourage you to look at the regional agreement. It talks about how that would be funded if approved. Again, I talked about there has to be a contingency vote at a subsequent town meeting by the transition committee. This would require a majority vote at another town meeting in each of the member towns. There's two different ways this can be done. I guess the recommended method, as it was described by the planning board, was majority approval of a ballot question, followed by approval by all voters across the new. So it's not a vote by each individual town, it's an approval of all voters across this regional school district. There is a secondary method, that's a different voting method, but this is kind of the first method put forward in the agreement. And lastly, and I'm not the finance person, I totally defer to the superintendent who did build another building, is the estimated cost is $100 million. I would encourage you to look at the MSBA project, or that's the number that I've seen bandied about. I would encourage you to look at the MSBA website. I would note, Neshoba Valley just built a school recently. Their costs were well over, that building cost roughly $240 million. That doesn't mean Neshoba paid $240 million. I believe they paid something around, less than that. But, I'm just encouraging you to look. I represent Minuteman Vocational School District. They built a new building. It was somewhere in the $150 million price tag. So that's another element, I'd encourage you to look at, take a closer look at. Another common question I know Beth has gotten, and the school committee has gotten questions, next slide please, is what happens to the assets and property of Southern Berkshire? Because Southern Berkshire owns, as you may know, in addition to the main campus, they own about 85 acres of land. All assets of Southern Berkshire become part of the new district. However, there is an exception that Southern Berkshire member towns are solely responsible for legacy debt. Legacy debt means the debt that existed prior to the formation of the new district. So, for example, they have a heating and boiling system or roofing system. That is a debt that solely the member towns of Southern Berkshire would be assessed for. There have been some questions, and I've taken a very preliminary look at this issue about the transitional committee, that they may enter into arrangements. As you may know, there's two elementary schools in Marlborough and Egremont. Those are subject to leases negotiated with those individual towns. That is not a guarantee. That is, it has to be a mutual agreement of those two towns to willingly to agree to a lease. So that is another open issue. I referenced the section of the agreement that talks about that issue. Next slide, please. So some other issues to consider. This is no particular order of priority or relevance, but some other notable provisions, and this is not an exhaustive list, we'd spend all night here, is I think the last version of the OPEB, of the original agreement that was approved last night, talks about OPEB liability. That is a significant factor. The estimated liability, according to Odyssey Advisors, the report on the 8 Towns website says the liability is $95 million, which means funding of retirement costs for retirees, of which approximately 2/3 of that liability is currently owned by Berkshire Hills, and 1/3 is owned by Southern Berkshire based on the size of the schools and number of retirees. That is a debt that is assumed by the new district. Again, we've talked about the lease. What happens if the towns will not agree to a lease? It's not clear to me. There's a legacy debt. It's not clear to me what, if any, Berkshire Hills legacy debt currently exists and how that would be addressed. And another notable point, as one of my colleagues noted, is the regional school district agreement says, assuming it is formed, it may be amended by a vote of 3/4 of the member towns. And that's a little concerning or worth noting because, at least in talking with my colleagues in DESE, it's more common to have a unanimous vote required to amend a regional agreement. This agreement says 3/4. I know I've given you a lot of information. I just kind of want to close very briefly with just some suggested resources and places to look. Next slide. Which would be review the regional school district agreement. There's a lot of information, but do not solely rely on the warrant article. The regional school district agreement is kind of the underlying linchpin of the warrant article. The warrant article is the formal vote taken. The regional school district agreement is what governs the new formation of the district. And it also addresses clearly issues that have to be decided at a later date. Other things I would encourage you to do, ask questions to your Board of Selectmen, ask questions to your local finance committee, and send district questions to Jake Everline and Lucy Krasker and the Regional School District Planning Board, because there is a lot of information out there. And again, here's my contact information, but I would suggest, please send any questions through the school district if they're for me. And I will take approximately 10 minutes of questions. I'll defer to Jesse to moderate that, please. Thank you.
Please, if you have questions, if you come up, we're going to try to get both from those on Zoom as well as those here. So if you come up, we'll try to get those in the 10 minutes. This first one, there is a rumor going around that even if the warrant doesn't pass, the State Department of Education, DESE, is going to step in and make the merger anyway. Can you address that issue?
Well, I haven't heard that rumor before, but that is not true. DESE does not have the statutory authority to approve a new regional agreement. That is a vote of the 8 towns. I'm not aware of any authority at that point that allows DESE to unilaterally impose. DESE helps facilitate it, they monitor the process, they ensure compliance with the statutes. It does require the approval of the DESE commissioner, but the DESE commissioner, in essence, does not have override authority over the 8 member towns.
Thank you. And if I forget to say it afterwards, I know we tortured you over this presentation, but thank you so much for the information and the work, and thank Nancy as well. Jesse, do you have a question? I do not have any more right now. Okay, all right, let's start.
Great.
What, can you do it at the mic?
I can speak into the mic, or I can.
Come around to the mic.
I'm a theater person. I can speak loudly. All right. So my question is, if the 8 towns vote for a new district, is there then, if I understand correct, it sounds like then there's another vote that would happen to decide if we're going to fund a new building. Is that correct? And so if that is the case, we would then maybe vote for a new district and then maybe not vote for a new high school? The funding for a new high school?
Thank you for the question. My understanding is that there will be 2 votes, one to form a new district, and yes, at a subsequent date, it would be contingent on approving the funding of incurring debt to build a new high school. What I don't know is if there's any plans, and it's not clear in the original agreement, if there's no funding of the new district, because it is a contingency of the warrant article, then the district would not come into formation. So that's why there are 2 votes at 2 different dates, and the second vote is not obviously it's scheduled because they're still in MSBA, what's called feasibility phase. There is no final cost on that building. Nancy, is there anything else you want to add on that point?
Yes.
Well, I would just say that, and if that were to happen, there would already have been a significant amount of money spent between the time that the initial vote is taken on October 23rd and the vote is taken on the funding. So even though there are 2 votes, you have to bear in mind that there will be additional expenses incurred if it's later voted down. And that vote on the borrowing, it's important to remember that there are 2 methods for that funding to be passed. And one is by having separate votes in each town at each town meeting, and it would have to pass by a majority. The other method is through the district-wide vote. And we, for example, have represented a number of communities where there was concern that it might not pass at the town meetings, that one town might vote it down. And so they eschewed that method and went right to the district-wide voting. And in some cases, some will have the voting at town meeting, and if that fails, then they will have the ballot question, so they'll take 2 bites of the apple. And some people would feel it's much easier to pass on the district-wide vote because you can maybe get a lot of people from one town that's more populous, and then people from the other towns maybe don't turn out at the ballot. So it's not, you can't guarantee yourself that your town will have a say in whether or not the borrowing is incurred.
Thank you, Nancy. I just want you to be aware, CTSB is recording this. I know it is a lot to digest in a short period of time. We will be posting, for the fact we're recording it as a Zoom conference, we will be posting it through the district, and CTSB has recorded it, so if you get CTSB, you will have that opportunity to see this entire evening's presentation. Okay. What? You have to do the mic, I'm sorry. Or else I'll translate, but it's better if you do it.
This is really preliminary. What happens if at a town meeting, the warrant article comes up and the moderator gets a request for an amendment and the body votes to amend the agreement? What happens then?
Nancy, do you want to take that question?
Adopted by all 8-member towns.
That's
so
not
if there's
the
an
question.
amendment on the floor at one meeting of the regional agreement, then it will not be adopted by all member towns. So that's not really a viable possibility. On the other hand, if you do that, that is a message to the regional planning board that the issue for your town was not whether or not there was going to be a combined district, but the wording of the regional agreement. And after an unsuccessful vote, the planning board could go back and revote a different regional agreement and then bring it back again to the towns to be voted on again. But if it's voted down the first time and they change the agreement, there will have to be a new town meeting because all 8 town meetings have to agree on the wording of the regional agreement.
Well, I'm a moderator in Egremont, and let's assume somebody raises their hand and says, I want to change the warrant article. And if that's approved, you're saying that our amended and changed vote would have to go to the other 7 towns to see if they would accept that?
If what you're changing is the terms of the regional agreement, absolutely. And I do not believe they could do it that night.
Why not?
Because, for one thing, you're having how many town meetings all at the same time?
You make an assumption that I'm not willing to make.
I just have to interrupt you because of time. We can pursue that in addition later. A question came up in terms of move.
I just have a clarifying question about what I asked. Go right ahead. Okay, thank you. So my clarifying question is, if the towns vote for the new district, and then the towns don't vote for the funding, I have 2 clarifying questions here. So my first one is, if they don't vote for the funding, is then the new district dissolved? And my second question is, is it the 8 towns that are being counted for majority majority, or is it the numbers of the people in those towns that are being counted?
So I'll answer the first part, I'll defer to, is that, yes, if there's no funding of the high school, because it is a contingency to the warrant article, which means one vote is dependent on a successor vote. If there no vote, if the unsuccessful vote in any of the member towns to incur the debt for the new high school, then the new school district is not established. There could be, like Nancy said, if you go back to the regional school district and they go back to the drawing board and go with a different plan that uses existing facilities, but the new district, as I always understand it, is premised on this piece.
Thank you.
Nancy, you want to answer the second question if you could?
As to the second question, if they go to a district-wide vote, the measure passes if the total vote all across all 8 towns, the majority of 8. So if a total of 8,000 people vote, 1,000 in each town, which is not going to happen, but just assume that. And if they get 4,001 votes, and 3,000 of them came from Great Barrington, and 1,000 came from Sheffield, but no one in Egremont voted for it, it would pass. Okay, so it's not that the voters in each town in the district-wide ballot have to approve it by 50%. It's that the total population of the entire 8 towns in the district, they just need to get 50% plus 1 vote at the ballot.
Okay, we have exactly 1 minute in this period, so I'm not taking any more questions until later on, but 2 things. For those of you who do not know, even though the MSBA is hopefully awarding somewhere in the $50 million range, MSBA is not paying for the entire school. The debt that we're talking about is the rest of the money that the 8 towns will be required to pay in order to have the buildings built. And this is a clarification. If we vote yes, then does that mean that all staff-related issues that were presented can occur? Like staff losing their jobs, not getting comparable health insurance costs or salaries. Is that what it means if it is passed?
So the new entity, if approved, is called what's called the successor employer. They would be the new employer of all of these employees as of the operational date. Without getting too far into labor law, when you start a new district, because I used to represent Essex North Shore in Danvers, Massachusetts, they start with 2 separate parallel agreements. The teachers of Southern Berkshire can make, a new teacher can make, I'm making up a number, 46,000, a Berkshire Hills employee can make 50,000, and work side by side with different benefits, different health insurance rates, all of those issues, until you successfully negotiate one unified agreement.
Thank you.
So in essence, you can have different benefits, but they also, I think part of your question, or whoever asked it, was, the new district can make staffing decisions. We have, I'm making up a hypothetical. We have 40 custodians. We looked at the square footage. We don't need 40 custodians in a new district. We only need 30. They can make there are no guaranteed employment rights except for PTS teachers by statute. That doesn't mean the district might not keep them. I think I've seen some literature that says it might be done by attrition, but those are all decisions to be made by the transitional committee and ultimately the new school committee.
Thank you. Josh will be staying through the next presentation because we will have open questions. At this point, I'm introducing Renee Wood, who is a member of the Sheffield Select Board. She was, but I'll finish it, but she also has been following everything that has gone on for the past 3.5 years in terms of the regional agreement, and she is speaking tonight as a private citizen of Sheffield. She is not speaking on behalf of the Select Board. We'll follow the same procedure. Renee will present. We will have 10 minutes of questions specifically on what Renee presents, and then we will have open questions.
Thank you, Bonnie. I want to again stress that I'm not speaking in any official capacity. I am speaking as a Sheffield resident and a taxpayer and a lover of this district who has followed this process quite extensively. Though I think the first thing that we should do before we get into my presentation is really follow up on the question that was just asked, because that is a significant question that could potentially change several opinions. So I don't know if Nancy is still with us, but Josh, if not, I want to read to you what the section on debt approval contingency says. It's on page 26. It says, blah, 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 shall vote. And the member towns, during the transition period, the transition committee and the member towns shall vote to approve the debt for the new high school in accordance with the terms of this agreement and the MSBA rules and regulations. Here's the critical part that you were addressing. Should the member towns fail to approve the debt for the new high school by a certain date, the transition period shall end, this agreement shall terminate, the district shall dissolve, and the existing districts shall continue in existence. It is my understanding at the meeting last night of the regional committee, someone asked to put in that each member town had to pass it. Are you saying that this is a group population decision? In other words, if Great Barrington and one other town were to vote, just those two towns, and then they had more votes than the other 6 towns, each of whom disapproved, would those 2 towns pass the day?
If there are 2 different ways of handling the approval of the borrowing. The statute gives the regional school district, which will mean the transition committee, the option of choosing. And if they fail on the first option they choose, they are entitled to then try the second option. Typically, districts, they do try to do it by the member towns and then have each member town, all 8 member towns, vote at town meeting to pass it by a majority of their own voters. But there have been districts where when that has failed, they have gone to a district-wide vote, and it wouldn't matter if all of the voters in 2 of the towns voted not to approve the borrowing. The borrowing could still be approved if enough other voters in the remaining 6 towns vote for the borrowing. And then those other 2 towns, they will have no choice. The borrowing is approved. Their only option is to withdraw from the district in order to avoid the borrowing.
So you're basically saying, again, I'm just going to spend a minute on this, if that's okay with I'm sorry? Okay. So basically right now, we will be taking these votes on October 21st and October 23rd. But what I'm hearing is if 6 towns say no, the Regional School District Planning Board has the ability to come back and officially request another vote. So please, would you please clarify? I'm trying to figure out whether we want it or not. If 2 towns have more votes than the rest of us, we have a new district.
It's only with regard to the borrowing that they can use the district-wide vote option. So in order to pass to approve the formation of the new district on October 23rd, they will need to have affirmative votes in all 8 member towns at all 8 town meetings. So if even one of the member towns votes down the warrant article, the regional school district, the new regional school district will not be formed at this time. But the planning board could go back to the drawing board and brainstorm to come up with a different way to form a new regional school district. But at that point, on October 23rd, if even one member town votes down the warrant article, the new district will not be formed.
Okay, so it's at the contingent debt approval that if the district is formed, that the population vote can become dominant rather than the town vote.
That's correct.
Okay, great. Let's go ahead and start my presentation. Thank you so much, Nancy. What I want to do is continue with what Josh and Nancy were talking about. And I'm not going to go through this regional agreement word by word with you, but I am going to tell you that it is a complicated document, and I expect that I will make some mistakes tonight. The new agreement was just approved last night, and there were several significant changes. I am going to encourage you to read this and to mark up what you don't understand, and come to the October 4th forum at the Mahawi or any of the other forums and really get your questions answered. So I am a person who started off in favor of the merger, or at least neutral, and now I am not for it because of this regional school district agreement as it is currently written. I will share some of those concerns with you, but that's not my major focus tonight. So could we go back to the first slide, please? I want to basically go over and do my best to have you understand what you're voting on, and as Josh has already done, what you're not voting on. We can go to the second slide, please. I want to start off by talking about what a regional school district agreement is. It's really a strategic plan for the district. It is a governance document. It says how, if it is passed, the 8-town regional agreement, how it will govern the newly formed school district. It is not one that deals with operational issues, such as what are the transportation routes, or who's on what bus, or who gets hired and who doesn't get hired, and is there salary parity. Those are operational issues that are dealt with after the agreement is passed. Next slide, please. There are 16 sections to this and 2 appendices. And I'll let you walk through each one of them with me right now, but please do read them. Next slide, please. So this is the roadmap and the strategic plan that will be used to take 2 districts and form them into one new district. During that time, we've talked already, Josh, about the transition process, which is really how we start the merger. Who's in charge of the transition process? Who's making the decisions? What will your input possibilities be? What are the duties and responsibilities of the transition committee? Because they're going to be in charge for quite a period of time. Who pays for it? That's already been talked about. DESE, which was very generous in funding, along with other contributions, almost $500,000 for the 8-town regional district planning board, has said there at this moment there is no money. There is no money that I am aware of that is being legislatively earmarked or put aside for this. They have the right to incur debt, and they have the right to assess the member towns. So someone is going to pay for this, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. And then, of course, I believe that Josh has already covered the operational date and how that comes about, so I'm not going to spend time on that. So next slide, please. So during the transition committee, which is really the time from the appointment of the transition committee to the operational date, that's the transition period. The people who will be on the transition committee are going to be appointed by the select boards with the, doesn't necessarily say a joint vote, but with the school committee representatives from that town. So if we take Sheffield, we have 3 selectmen, we have 4 representatives on our school committee. If we take Alford, we have 1 in 3 selectmen and 1 school representative. So it's an appointed position. And they are going to become the elected transition committee at the next biennial election, which will be in November of '24. And then after a certain period of time, and excuse me for not knowing that exact date at this moment, it will become the elected school committee. So you will have a chance to vote on the transition committee, basically the same way we do now, just in a combined 8 community residential requirement. During the transition period, Berkshire Hills and Southern Berkshire will remain and operate as is. All of the schools, from pre-K through 12, everyone will attend their school. There'll still be a choice, but it's kind of business as usual. However, neither one of the districts can make any funding or any other decision that is going to have a material impact on the new district. Now, this isn't normal budgeting of things, but if there was potentially a program that they wanted to introduce or do some sort of a major repair that was needed, as I have read this, it would need to be approved by the transition committee. What the transition committee, I believe, is trying to do is make sure that nobody runs up debts that then, or makes decisions that are going to affect the new regional school district if this passes. The next slide, please. I want you to focus particularly on what is the power that is given to this appointed, then elected transition committee. And Josh spent time talking about this, but a lot of this is where the rubber starts meeting the road. And if you look down this list, you're going to see that I personally can't think of a single person that I know in Berkshire County who could do this on their own, even if they had 11 members. This is tough stuff. How many of us know someone who could negotiate collective bargainings with unions, different unions at each of the 2 districts? What I'm trying to suggest is that there are going to be professionals who are going to need to be hired to help these people. The same way that consultants have been hired to help the regional school planning board come up with all of the documents, all the videos, et cetera, that have been produced, as well as this regional 8-town agreement. That's going to cost money. And for a certain period of time, again, remember, these people will be appointed. As you look through this, I want you to note that the transition committee can set a budget during the transition, as well as the first year, and it can assess member towns for the cost of what that budget is for them to do their work. I didn't quite find how this is assessed, and that will be one of my questions to Lucy and Jake after this meeting. I just couldn't quite find out how this is assessed. So we have our budget in each of the schools, because for a certain period of time, those school districts operate as normal. So here in Southern Berkshire, we'll have our own budget to run this school and all its facilities and programs. And then it is, in my view, 99.9% certain that we will also be sharing in some transitional costs. That is my personal opinion, but I think it's pretty valid. Again, no funding is allocated at this moment. Doesn't mean it won't be, but at this moment, there is no funding. Next slide, please. I also want to say what the regional agreement is not. And this has been kind of hit on a little bit tonight, but the operational issues that Josh talked about and were some of the responsibilities of the transition committee are not spelled out in the regional agreement. And they shouldn't be, because those are decisions that elected and school officials make. So if you're thinking, as Josh used the example of staff, that there's going to be pay equity, don't know that. If you're thinking that there's going to be 50% of the teachers hired and staff from Southern Berkshire and 50% from Berkshire Hills, we don't know that. We don't know what the bus routes are going to be. We don't know who's going to be on what bus. We don't know what the time is going to be, even though there's been studies that have shown that this can be less time than our current bus routes. We don't know that. So I really just want you to think about that. We also don't know what the curriculum would be. We do know, as I've been told by Superintendent Beth, that the early college program will not transfer over, and that has also been stated by the provost of Simon's Rock, who is, the top dog at Simon's Rock. So again, transition committee to elected transition committee to elected school committee. Next slide, please. So let's get into parts of the agreement, which again, I strongly encourage you to read. So I'm just going to walk through very quickly, and I'm not going to read the slides to you, you can read them. But the new district will be basically like ours and Berkshire Hills. It will do PK through 12. The interesting thing, so much has been made of vocational, career, and technical. The wording in this section says that the school committee is authorized in its discretion. It doesn't say shall establish. It doesn't say will establish. It says it's authorized in its, at its discretion to establish and maintain. That's an interesting choice of words for me. The second thing is that they can join elected educational collaboratives, and my reading of the state law on that says they also can start charter schools. There is no mention of special education, and I'm not sure that it should be mentioned in the regional agreement. That's an operational component that will be decided by the transition committee and then the school committee and the professionals that are hired. So let's talk about the school committee composition. Every town will have a representative, and they should. Every town will have a voice at the table. Sheffield will have 2 because of its size, and Great Barrington will have 3. There is nothing in the agreement that specifically says the voting powers will equal the representation powers, but it's implied. So let's look at the next slide. And this is something that I've been talking to the people on the regional school planning board, I think since my first 13-page comments to them. I don't think it is fair that the representation on the school committee equals the voting rights. Because what this says is that Alford, at 2.7% of the population, has equal to one of the representatives from Great Barrington, where that representative's vote equals 13%. I personally think it should be done by the percentage, and at Berkshire Regional Transit Authority, which has 20-some members, when they vote on the board, they do it by percentages. And I've never seen a vote held up from being announced by somebody trying to figure out percentages. I'm very uncomfortable when people spend other people's money and they don't have as much skin in it. I'm picking on Alford, not because I want to, but because they have 2.7%. I'm concerned that Stockbridge at 11% also has the same voting right when it comes to budgets and major decisions, not input on decisions, but major decisions as Alford does. So that's kind of a thought to think about. So let's get into the specifics, next slide please, of student assignments, intra-district choice tuition. Again, the two districts operate separately until the operational date. It's my understanding from reading this agreement that during the transition, student assignments as usual, school choice. There is one little thing though in this section that says, and I quoted it for you, district students shall, not may, shall attend the school in closest proximity to their residence with transportation provided, etc. My question on this is, does it mean that everyone in Alford, maybe a portion in Monterey, some in New Marlboro, that they will not, as of the operational date, attend Southern Berkshire Regional School District schools, but instead will be going to Berkshire Hills? Actually going to the new region, but the schools in Great Barrington, excuse me for that. If that's the case, what does that do to our staffing here? What does that do to our employees who will now be part of the new region? I think personally that is an operational issue and should not even be in this school district agreement. Next slide, please. The next one to pay special attention to is section 4. It deals with the location, ownership, lease, and closure of schools. This was talked about before, but as it should, the committee will basically run the operation with the superintendent, the location, structure, physical plant, etc. Now, it says that school buildings in a member town may be owned by the district or leased. Okay, not shall, may. And that, as of those buildings that are in Southern Berkshire, as well as in Berkshire Hills, the ownership of those, as of the date of the agreement, on the operational date per special legislation, because we know that there could be one operational date, and if it's special legislation, it will be 2, will go over to the district, the new regional school district. My question is, since there's going to be a new high school, part of this building, part of this campus will not be used. There's 85 acres on this campus. Why is it all going over to the 8-town regional district when it could be used by the 5 towns that own it for workforce housing, for non-profit building, rented out to non-profits, used for only education? It's just a question. I don't know why the whole campus is going when we know that if this agreement is approved, that the likelihood of a new high school being built is extremely high. Now, with regard to the leased schools, that's New Marlboro Central, and that's South Egremont, they will be leased. They may enter into a lease, but if they're going to be leased, they can be leased up to 20 years. That's the initial lease. There's a provision that says that they can be leased up to another 20 years by the district. But I didn't read that consent was required by either of those towns, and the option to end the lease is only available to the district. The improvements that might need to be made, and I think most of us know that the Egremont School has been improved, but probably needs more. The New Marlboro Central definitely needs more. That will will be cost shared, 90% to Southern Berkshire Regional School District towns and 10% to Berkshire Hills. Now, there's some ways that changes over time, but if we're a regional school district, why aren't we sharing the costs? Especially since the cost of these buildings will be considerably less than the new high school, probably much less than $10 million. If capital debt is incurred, and you can read about this, the town may be given the option of assuming it themselves. And there is, and I'm not going to go through it for you, but there is a way that this could potentially lead to school closure process, which I'm going to tell you is very complicated. I think the same type of school closure process that we have in our current agreement is pretty much in here, but there are some things to pay attention to. Next slide, please. One of the things that I was very happy to see that was changed before the agreement was adopted yesterday, something I've been advocating for, is that if the property is sold, that is in the new district, that it will be proportionally distributed for those folks who have invested in it further, rather than just the town that it was in, which was originally stated. And of course, if there's been further improvements, then the folks in the 8-town regional district, there'll be a formula that shares on both sides. Section 5 goes into the budget. Next slide, please. And it goes into the apportionment of costs. I'm going to have you read that. There's one way, let me rephrase that. We're going to talk about various costs. There's capital costs financed by debt. We know from previous discussion by Josh that the legacy debt for the boiler, etc. on this will be paid for by our towns. The high school debt will be 90-10, and it may actually be 90-10. We don't know that we are going to get that 6%. I'm speaking Southern Berkshire here, and the Berkshire Hills don't know that they're going to get whatever the percent is, 40 or 50%. Schools have been costing more, and I think we should assume that 10% will go down to $4 million. I think we should assume that it's going to be $10 million that we pay if it's $100 million, or 10% if it's more. We know that in the agreement there is a shift in the debt starting in fiscal year 2033 for 5 years, where Southern Berkshire will pick up another percent a year, so we'll end up with 15% of that high school, and Berkshire Hills will go down by the corresponding amount. On the town-owned buildings, if there are improvements, and it'll be spread out to the towns as we discussed, 10 to 90, and there will be also a decline 1% a year for the same time period, where the Southern Berkshire towns will reduce down to eventually 85% of that debt obligation, and Berkshire Hills towns will go up to 15%. There's a whole section on capital costs not financed by debt. I encourage you to read that. Next slide. Now, this is just something that I just want you to read at your own convenience, but this is the apportionment of operating costs. And what it seeks to do in a nutshell is make sure that no town gets hit above a certain amount, that it's no more than 2%. Our budgets here at Southern Berkshire are generally 3.5. There's some that goes to 4, we get crazy. As one of my fellow selectmen said, can we afford the financial habits of Berkshire Hills? I don't know. Just read this, and then try and figure out how your debt is going to be assessed. So if we go to the next slide, we're going to see that there's also transportation costs. So when you do the total assessment for each of the towns, this will be the same for Berkshire Hill towns, all 8 towns. You've got your capital costs, you've got all the legacy debt, then you've got the new high school debt, then you've got the town-owned building debt, then you've got the capital costs not financed by debt, then you've got the operating costs, then you've got the transportation costs, and then you've got the liability costs that Josh spoke about, the 99 million plus. And all of these costs are yet to be determined. Next slide, please. So when we go to the section in the agreement on transportation, we'll be given school transportation for all students as we should be. Again, I'm not going to dwell on this, operational details are missing. And I will also mention that I think you should talk to Marie Mancini. She does not seem to be very much in support of the transportation plan that was done by a consultant. She can share that information with you. Next slide, please. Amendments can be made. It does, it's a pretty high threshold, but they can be made. There's also something I want you to think about and pay special attention to, and that is the admission of a new member town. It would be an amendment to the regional agreement. The member town would have to agree, and all of the new member town would have to agree, but all of the current members would also have to agree, as it should be. And they would be submitted, they would be admitted on July 1st of any fiscal year. What I did not see stated or very clear is what share of costs and liabilities would the new member town assume. I didn't see anything on this. And how would their voting or representation be determined? And every time you add a new member town, Richmond's been talked about, there's another town that's been talked about, do you end up diluting even further the voting percentage, the voting strength of the two largest towns, Great Barrington and Sheffield? Next slide, please. So, as we move on in this agreement, withdrawal of towns, you do not want to withdraw. I'm not sure that it's specified as clearly as it should be, but the costs to withdraw are significant, and they go on. The annual report, there is one, just like both towns do. They will include a detailed financial statement. Select boards can ask for more information. The review of the regional agreement, it goes on in 5-year intervals. It is reported to the school committee, and if it was to be amended, it would go through the amendment process where it would have to be approved by all the towns. So let's go to the next slide. And we get into the transition period. It's been previously discussed. We don't know the exact time length of the transition period to be determined because it can be influenced by special legislation. We don't know how it's going to be financed. That's going to be determined. But I do think it will we'll probably get some state money, but I do think there is going to be assessment to the towns. And we do not know the process for which, and again, this is an operational issue. It should not be in a regional agreement, but we do not know the process for how much public input, which I hope they will take a lot of, but that's to be determined. The next section of the effective date of this agreement would be the date it is approved by the majority of voters in all 8 towns. The transition period we've talked about may be 6/30/25, maybe 6/30/26, special legislation at midnight. And when we hit the new operational date, we have the new Southern Berkshire Hills Regional School District. Next slide, please. So Josh touched on this a little bit, but in section 15, and there's only 16, and 16 is definitions. There is that last sentence. And I know that I believe Desi, I shouldn't say I know, but I know a recent change was that all OPEB, other post-employment benefits, local pensions and any pension obligations was added. All of the assets and all of the liabilities of both districts are combined into the new district. Berkshire Hills, as I understand it from our lawyer, has about twice the liabilities as Southern Berkshire. I think he was speaking more on OPEB, health insurance and all of that. But that's a $99 million bundle. And also liabilities including the lawsuits, judgments, awarded, etc. Now, as we finish this up in section 15, we've already talked about the debt approval contingency. It's just interesting to know that that's a population vote, not a specific, or it can be a population vote. The special legislation he talked about, the district is not operational until the special legislation is enacted, and that is legislation that has to be approved by both the House and the Senate in Massachusetts. If the special legislation is not enacted prior to voter approval of the debt contingency, the whole thing reverts back to the two pre-existing districts. The definitions make up section 16. There's the signature page. There's two appendices, next slide please, that are attached. Appendix A, which is an illustration of the capital cost with a great chart that you can follow. Basically, these costs, as we heard earlier from Josh, and as we all know, they're assumptions. They're best estimates, but they're still assumptions. And we don't know what the MSA will provide in costs. Appendix B goes through several pages. It's an illustration of operating, transportation, and non-debt capital cost assessment, the methodologies that are spelled out in the budget section. There is a very big disclaimer on that basically says the numbers are illustrative only. They are not real numbers because nobody knows the real numbers. The real costs are to be determined. So in summary, last slide please. I would just ask you to read the agreement. Also read the rest of the warrant because you're going to be voting on a couple of things, which is the special legislation. The special legislation is basically needed to allow the new district to absorb the properties and assets of the two existing districts and basically void out both of those two existing regional agreements. Put aside what you've heard, put aside what you've read, put aside what has been written, because all of those papers you're not voting on. Those are hopes, those are dreams, those are aspirations, good intentions, wonderful work that the 8-town Regional School Committee board has done. But what you're voting on is what's in the regional agreement. And what you're voting on is what's in the warrant. All the rest of it, it's not there. And if it's not in the regional agreement spelled out, it's up for someone else to decide, like the transition committee or later the school committee. Separate what you want from what you're actually voting on. And think about, we haven't spent much time on education, and so many of us have spent time voting, in meetings. There's very little on education. There isn't even a section on education in those 16. There's a little section on vocational, which is at the discretion. There's no issue on here in programming. That's all to be decided. And we've spent so much time hoping for our kids and what this could possibly mean. And what are the true costs? We don't know. They're to be determined. And while there is a safety valve, now we find that it's less of a safety valve because it could be by either member town numbers or by population. It's very hard to undo things once they get started. So you all can pick up a copy of the regional agreement as it was approved yesterday, and it's also on the website, so let's open it up to questions.
everyone here should have a dinner or brunch or something and invite 10 people to go over the regional agreement with you. It's a lovely way to spend a wet fall day. I think what Renee has done is something a good number of us have not wanted to do, which is go through item by item. And now you can take her presentation and line it up with the regional agreement. You are going to have numerous opportunities beyond today. You can send Jake and Lucy questions. It would be a great way to have things incorporated into the presentation at the Mahaley, or the meeting that'll take place here on the 11th, or the one that'll take place in Berkshire Hills on the 18th. The biggest thing that we want you to be aware of, and Renee has said it, and Josh has said it, it's really on all of us, because we are making a decision that is going to impact our communities in so many ways for decades. Look at the fact for us that our district is the largest employer, or the second largest employer, in several of our communities. I'm not saying to maintain everything because of employment, but we have to look at the impact. We have to look at the impact on our kids who are involved in things like Historical Society and other organizations. So you've got a lot to do moving ahead. All right, we now have the 10 minutes for questions. Vito, you have to come up here. Come around this way.
Actually, I have a comment and then a question. I have a lot of questions, but for brevity. Comment number one, it would seem to me that if this passes at the town meeting, the school vote is a done deal, considering that they get two bites of the apple and considering the different sizes of the population. I don't see for a moment that we would not be saddled with some debt. I'm annoyed that our legacy debt, for instance, it's always been my idea that when you combine things, you take the debt, you take the assets, you put it all together. We will have our legacy debt, and then we will start incurring debt for the new school. That means that not only do we have the legacy debt that we have a mandatory $400,000 a year because of the legacy debt that is mandated in terms of our capital costs, plus we're then going to start having debt for the new school. But my main question is it, and this is for the attorney, is it usual for a district to have the ability to restructure the agreement with just 3/4 of the vote? Because if that's the case, 5 years down the road, you don't know what you're going to be getting.
So my understanding in speaking with Nancy and looking at other agreements briefly is that it's kind of an unusual provision. It is allowed, it's legal, but it is unusual that it requires only 3/4 of the member towns to amend an agreement. Because once you enter, as 8 towns enter into a party, if you look at basic contract principles, when you have 2 parties enter into an agreement, you can't amend that agreement by 1 party. If you have a 3-party agreement, it's not done. So that is unusual in our experience. I don't know if Nancy has anything else to say on that.
Thank you. Jesse, do you have anything from the folks on? Jesse, do you have any from the folks who are on Zoom?
Right now, we do not accept, we're just getting one now. So.
Okay.
Just take one from the crowd.
Take one from the crowd. All right, Kim? Come, please. You have to come. Sorry about that.
So this is more of an observation after reading the 8-town agreement about intra-district choice. And I guess this would be for Josh. By reading what it says the superintendent shall assign students to the school, taking into account but not bound by, is one of the statements. And the other is, sorry. If the committee decides to participate in inter-district school choice. To me, that says both those could override kids coming to Mount Everett. Is that true? If one chooses not to participate and one says, no, I don't want to send kids there?
I don't have an answer at the moment. I'd have to take a closer look at that provision. I mean, school choice is generally, in general, school communities decide they have a choice whether to participate in school choice or not. It's not required by law.
So
It's
basically,
an
they could shut
optional
down the
annual
school.
vote that's taken, but I'd have to look at the agreement in further detail.
But what it says is their choice to do so.
Yeah. Nancy, do you have any initial thoughts or?
The only thing I would say is make sure that when you're looking at that paragraph, you're perceiving the difference between inter-district choice and intra-district choice.
No, it says
Because I do believe they're going to do the intra-district choice, but you cannot bind in a regional agreement the school committee to participate in inter-district choice every year. That has to be a decision for each school committee to make.
Thank you.
Just for information purposes, every year the school committee votes with the recommendation of the superintendent whether we participate in school choice and the number of students we are willing to take in each grade. So we've done that on a regular basis. No, that is, we decide if it's the 8-town district. All right, do we have Doug Newman's question?
Yeah, I'm here. How are you, Bonnie?
Okay, so he's there. Why don't we let him ask his question?
Okay, my question goes to, I believe, what Josh Coleman was talking about during his presentation. And I think Nancy may have had part of the follow-up as well. But here's what my concern is, and perhaps I didn't understand it clearly. Let's just say, for example, 7 out of the 8 towns approve the warrant. And then it goes back to the committee. And the committee comes back and says, well, okay, we've got 7 out of the 8. Let's go for another vote. And would it only then be offered to, I mean, it's a little hypothetical, but would it only be offered to the 7 towns? Because what would the 8th town do to educate their children? I would think that if it went down by only 1 town or 2 towns out of the 8, and there's going to be a re-vote, it might behoove us to open it up to all 8 towns again, so that, you know, the first pass, at least all the towns got to see, you know, what the general feeling was amongst the towns. And if we don't do that, how is that one town supposed to educate the children?
Okay, I can quickly, because we want to use the 10 minutes. The way it is done is it's very clear in the regional agreement. If one town says no on the 21st or the 23rd, that means we revert back to what currently exists. Berkshire Hills Regional School District, Southern Berkshire Regional School District. That also means that based on the will of the Regional Planning Board, it is possible to revisit this and reorganize based upon a 7-town district and go through the whole process and resubmit it. But should one town turn it down, everybody knows how the kids are going to be educated. They go back to the 2 existing districts. That's what's in the regional agreement. That's why Renee has parsed this out. So you can line it up, invite everybody, you can do your Roberto's Pizza, and have a bunch of people sit and go through the regional agreement. Josh, did you want to add to that?
It's a good point that I don't know the answer, Doug, exactly, other than you'd have to restructure the 7-town agreement, and it raises questions of whether the withdrawal provisions apply via their agreement, because it's not a total dissolution of the district, and even though it in essence is, and whether that other school district would in theory have to educate its kids elementary, K through 12. I think that's a good question. I don't know if that's been considered by the board. It is a little speculative, as you know, or just, it's an issue to be determined. And also, the entire assessment formula would change because, based on that. So there's a lot of moving questions. I don't know if Nancy has anything else on that point.
I do think they would have to go back to the drawing board, because DESI requires, when there's a restructuring, that you provide long-term educational plans for all of the participating districts. So I think that a plan to be approved by DESI for a restructuring that had fewer than all of the 8 towns, a plan would have to be established for how those kids in that 8th town were going to be educated. So it would be really, truly back to the drawing board, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. Yes. Good. Go right ahead.
Yeah, good evening. My name is Len Burrows. I'm 39 Pinecrest Hill Road in Egmont. Is this a 3-year study? Was this started 3 years ago? Oh, years ago. So, yeah, just from a people perspective, I think sometimes we get lost in the numbers. What is the outcome of this 5-10 years out? Are we going to be a better district? It's going to be better education. It's going to be better value. It's going to draw people here. Where's the people component? I'm just wondering, after a 3-year study, why can't we have white papers projecting where we can be if this were to go through? Why can't we concentrate on how we can transition as people for doing this undertaking? This is not something that's not involved with human beings. The schools, everywhere you look, the students, the teachers, the people who provide the services, the people who are the residents here to pay for this. Why can't we have some information on where this thing's going to be, what it's going to look like? Is this just an experiment to build a new school for Great Barrington? Or is this a plan to get us to be in a better place 10, 15 years from now?
Thank you for your comment and for being willing to make it. Okay, if the existing Southern Berkshire Regional School District high school students move to a new combined school, when and where will the use of the existing Mount Everett High School campus, what will happen to the campus? Is it feasible that oh God, who's handwriting? Everett's existing building could be what's this word?
Okay, let me just say, this is the English teacher, former English teacher's reading, so I can't read it. Okay.
Just tell me what
Is it
you think this
feasible?
word?
Is it feasible that Mount Everett's existing building could be repurposed for the new high school, which would eliminate the need for a new building?
I'll just briefly say, that's really an operational issue. The transition committee and the new school committee, what if any purpose the new the existing school uses. The plan, as I understand it, is currently designed, is all contingent on Berkshire Hills building a new school, not using the existing the existing facilities. So those are questions. Those are all open questions. They could sell the building for all, as an option. They could lease the building. I mean, there's a myriad of options of what could be done with Southern Berkshire by the new transitional committee and ultimately the full school committee of the new district, if the warrant article is approved in all 8 towns.
Okay, we have a couple of questions.
So Nancy has another comment on it.
My only question is, my understanding was that the new school is just a high school, so where are all of the middle school going? And where are the elementary students going from schools other than Egremont and New Marlboro? Is that not what the Mount Everett School will be used for? Because you're going to have more kids than from the Berkshire Hills Regional School District in elementary through middle school. I don't know what the plan is. I just thought that. My assumption was that that was the plan.
Just for your information, the existing Muddy Brook, the existing Devise Middle School, the existing Undermountain Elementary, the existing Egremont Elementary, and the existing New Marlboro Central are existing. They are not being eliminated. They're not, as of now, nobody has, and those schools are all in existence. The idea of moving all high school students to our campus was rejected by the Regional Planning Board based upon geography. As you know, Southern Berkshire Regional School District is about as south and west as you can get in Massachusetts. And also, as most everyone here knows, that Berkshire Hills has been trying for way over a decade to get a new building or to get major repair. So it's at this point, the rejection of using our campus, and we're very proud of how we've maintained it. Thank you, Vito Valentini, who was our former head of our Buildings and Grounds Subcommittee. We are at the point where we are not using, it was rejected to use our campus for all of the high school students. I saw a couple of other questions here. Sharon. Yeah, please, come right to the bottom. You're welcome.
Sharon Gregory. To put my question in perspective, I spent 21 years in Sheffield and 21 years in Great Barrington, so I love both towns. So I know there's a lot of anxiety about what's going to happen and a lot of questions too. Many of the questions I think are going to be addressed in the transition and the ultimate school committee. But one thing I wanted to point out is that, I don't know why it's not clear in the charts, but there will be 6 representatives from the Southern Berkshire Regional School District and 5 from Berkshire Hills. So when we say we don't know who's going to be the superintendent, who's going to be, hired, fired, what policy, decisions are going to be made, well, your school committee and our school committee make a lot of those. And so the combined ones will be making many of these decisions, including, I think, the selection of the superintendent. So, maybe some of the Berkshire Hills people would say, well, how come we only get 5? But, Southern Berkshire has a lot of power. And I hope that, thinking about the fact that Southern Berkshire's had about 1,000 students in 2000, and it had half of that in 2022. I don't know, both school districts are declining, so I hope we can reach some togetherness and have faith that we all are fair. Anyway, I love both towns.
Don't worry. Come up here and make the question on operating costs. Okay. Come on.
I have another question for Josh.
I have a legal question. Okay, so this question is for Josh. Josh, Barbara Marshona with the Finance Committee in New Marlboro. I do not understand how any of our towns would be able to go for a capital expenditure as being a new school. All towns require we would require a 2.5 override, which would be a vote and a ballot vote. I mean, I'm talking about down the road if we went to build a school. So that's a question. I don't understand how the district, the new quote district, could expend monies without that approval of the towns. You were talking about the 2 bites of the apple, with the different voting. So that's one question. The other question I'd like or a comment I'd like to make is, number one, this planning committee that we've put together. This is the 4th planning committee that we've had in the past 30 years. The 4th. And there's a reason for it because there is a need. And I mean, I was on the school committee for 6 years. I've had all of my children, all of my grandchildren go to school here. I love this district. I love this school. I love the staff. I love our theater. But we have got to be, number one, thankful that at least we're looking into this. And number two, we have to realize that, you're talking about people can 2/3 of people can vote to pass something, all right, all right, okay. So the original regional school agreement that was put together in 1952 required that all 5 towns would have to vote to close one of our schools, okay? Several years ago, a school committee got together and, you were on that committee, and you decided that only, how many of the towns? 4 of the 5 towns. So in other words, New Marlboro Central, which I objected to at the time, New Marlboro Central, if the school district decided that they wanted to close our school, the other 4 towns could vote for it. Even if New Marlboro didn't want to close the school, they would close the school. So that is already in place. What I'm saying is I agree with what that gentleman said before. We've all got to work together. This is about our kids. I'm concerned about finances. I'm concerned about our children having 20 kids in their class. The projection 6 years from now is that both districts combined are going to have like 1,000 kids. So we've got to keep going with this. If it doesn't pass this time, we've got to find a way to pull all of our towns together for our kids. And whether it's 2 districts, whether it's turning this school into a magnet school, I mean, we've got to, and we have to be supportive of the people that we appointed to put this committee together. I mean, they've had 200 meetings. We've had a couple of public meetings, that's it. So there's a lot of questions, but I really do want to know about a 2.5 override, because we would have to, if we were approving, say New Marlboro's share was $2 million for a school, or even $1.5 million for a school, we would have to have a town meeting, and then we would have to approve an override. So I don't know how the district could approve a new school without that kind of a vote. So I guess I need clarification from that. And again, thank you to the planning committee, because we've got a lot of questions and we need to figure this out. Night.
And Nancy's going to answer this question, I think.
With regard to votes for borrowings with MSBA projects, the MSBA gives you the form of the vote, right? And by the way, you don't approve approve a borrowing of just the amount you think you're going to pay. You have to agree to approve and appropriate the entire amount of the project. Just in case the MSBA backs out, I have never in my experience known the MSBA to back out by the time they reach this point, but that's what they require. And routinely, the member towns, when they put that on their warrant article, they include a debt exclusion and a ballot for a debt exclusion afterwards. Now, if you go and you do it by a ballot, then what you've done is the district has approved that spending, and then they assess the funds, the amount of money, to the member towns, and the member towns raise it in whatever way they need to. And if that means at that point, that means the member town is going to have to go to and appropriate, pass the appropriation with the borrowing with debt exclusion at that point. At that point, once it's been passed, you can go to your town meeting, and that's how you'll appropriate it, is by a debt exclusion, the money that you need to pay your share.
The question is, what if it's voted down?
Now, then it may be that your next alternative is to withdraw from the district. But it's just like with the regular assessments that you get from the town. Believe it or not, with the regional school district, once the budget is passed, and if you're a regional school district and you use the statutory method, not every town has to vote in favor of the budget, correct? And if one town doesn't, they still have to pay the amount of money if all of the other towns voted and approved the budget. They will have to go back to town meeting and they will have to appropriate it. They have a legal obligation to appropriate the necessary funds in the budget.
Thank you. All right,
Quickly, capital costs are capital costs, but far and away, the big beast is the operating cost. A number of years ago in this district, there was a novel arrangement in terms of operating costs. Different towns had different amounts, but as I recall correctly, there is a statutory split in operating costs, and if any one town disagrees with the novel arrangement, then it reverts to the statutory. And I'm curious to see if that would be the case in this case too, because it seems that this is sort of a novel operating arrangement.
Thank you. So either if you want to respond to that as illegal?
You know, I looked at the method, and to be honest, I would have to go to Desi to see whether or not that was actually the statutory method, because the statutory method deals with everybody has to pay the amount of their a certain amount, right? And then your operating budget is divided really into two different segments, and one is what is the required local contribution from each member town, and the alternate method is when you shuffle around those figures. But then you can do whatever you want with the amount over the required local contribution without saying that's not the statutory method. And so I believe that this method constitutes a statutory method. But I'd have to look at it closer, or I'd have to talk to Desi about whether or not they believe it does. The other thing is that the statutory method applies to operating expenses. And much of where the unusual nature of this budget comes in has to do with capital expenses. And so that wouldn't be a violation of the statutory method. There are many regional school districts who divide capital costs up not based on student enrollment, but on other factors. For example, where the location is of the actual school building.
Thank you. All right, again, Josh, I think this is for you. Is it in this agreement that the new district could decide to move the middle school and the elementary school children and close the outlying schools in the future. Does anything in this agreement prohibit those changes in the future?
So the general answer is there's a whole provision in the agreement about the process for closing a school. And then the second question, which is pretty detailed, I'm just trying to find, it's in section 4, page 7 of the agreement. There's all these steps of feasibility study, but they do have the authority to close a school within certain time periods. And then it's operational whether schools get relocated, is my understanding. I don't know if Nancy wants to add anything else on that point.
Thank you. That's why you have to get a bunch of people together and you all discuss it. David, come on.
Sorry, I just want to add one other point because I just found it. It says, no vote to close the school shall happen unless it's a majority vote of the resident voters in at least 6 of the member towns. So that's in page 9, so you should take a look at that as well.
Yes, this is kind of about Renee's point surrounding the college program we have here at Mount Everett. So Renee had illustrated that simply would not transfer over to the new district. But what would prevent the new district from establishing such a program, seeing as it will be populated by a simple majority of members from the towns that make up the current Southern Berkshire Regional School District?
Our wall-to-wall early college is a special program that is grant funded, and the program is part of a unique study. So therefore, we were selected to initiate this particular program. It cannot be interfered with by adding other school to it, because the data is all being collected on this program. That does not mean that the new district couldn't opt to initiate another program, a similar program, but we've done the research and there is not a way to take our early college high school and have it merge if we were to merge. So that answer we received. Okay, do we have any other questions? Okay, Lucy.
I brought a little stool so I could see you guys. I'm very height challenged. Good evening. I really wish we had been given an opportunity to present to you tonight, because we could have answered 98% of the questions that were asked tonight. It's now 9:15, and there are a lot of questions that have been asked and very few answers provided. And we could have answered those questions if we had been given the opportunity. I just want to say a couple of things, because there's no way I can answer all the questions that were asked in the last 2 hours. First, the assessment methodology that's in the agreement is absolutely a statutory method. That has been confirmed by DESE. The agreement provides that no town possibly could pay less than its required local contribution, and it says that 5 different ways in the agreement. That's part of the reason the agreement is as long as it is, because we had to say that 5 different ways, but we got the stamp of approval from DESE on that. And it is a statutory method, so there's no question about that. I also want to speak a little bit to school committee composition because I think it's essential, as Sharon said and others have said, that the school committee composition that is in the regional agreement is really pretty extraordinary from the perspective of the Southern Berkshire Regional School District towns, in that although the population, the relative population of the Berkshire Hills towns as compared to the Southern Berkshire towns is about 70% Berkshire Hills towns and about 30% Southern Berkshire towns. The way the school committee composition works under this proposed agreement is that 66 out of the 11 members are residents of the Southern Berkshire towns. So the Southern Berkshire town residents actually hold a majority on not just the new school committee once the school becomes operational, which probably would be July 1, 2026, but the transition committee as well. So when we're worried and we're fearful about what this transition committee is going to do, this transition committee is us. We will be, the Southern Berkshire resident members will have a majority of that transition committee, as it will have a majority of the school committee once the district becomes operational. If we did what Renee suggested and made our votes proportional, we would have 30%. 30%. We would be a small minority if we made our votes proportional. That's not what we want, and that's not what we have now. So I'm from the town of Alford, the little town of Alford. On our school committee now, Alford has a vote of 1 out of 10. So we have a 10% vote right now. So that's more than the 2% that Renee thinks is the right vote for Alford with this larger district. We have a 10% vote right now. We litigated this issue among our 5 towns in the 1990s. I remember it. I was on the school committee. I was a named defendant in that lawsuit brought by the town of Sheffield under the one person, one vote theory, that our system of school committee composition then violated the one person, one vote constitutional principle. And that case was settled by eventually having the system we have now, which is that all of our school committee members are elected district-wide. So while, yes, we have residency requirements, all of our school committee members are supposed to be representing the residents of all 5 towns. And that's going to be the same with the new district. All of the school committee members are going to be elected district-wide with residency requirements. And that's why it passes muster under the one person, one vote principle, and that's why it works. Because once you get to the table, you shouldn't be thinking about your individual town. You should be thinking about the welfare of the students across the district. And that's sort of what animates the whole effort here, is that the select boards in each of the 8 towns, including Renee, asked these 24 planning board members to spend time, effort, money to study the educational and financial feasibility of merger. We did that. We spent over 3.5 years doing that. We held more than 180 public meetings. We addressed all of these issues. On the regional agreement, we spent almost a year going through these provisions section by section. We had something like 19 votes on each section of these the regional agreement, and all but a handful were unanimously passed. Bonnie voted in favor of the school committee composition that is in the regional agreement, and in favor of most of the other provisions in the regional agreement as well. So I hope that you consider that when you consider whether the regional agreement makes sense or not. I just ask you, we left some materials out front for you to look at. We have our recommendation report, which summarizes our recommendation and the basis for it, and there's a lot in there about educational benefits, because I agree with the gentleman who said we should be talking about education here, and we didn't have a chance to do that tonight. The other, will do. The other document I'd like you to look at is the Your Vote, Your Choice document, where we list on one side what voting yes would mean, and we list on the other side what voting no would mean. But thank you for giving me this opportunity. I wish I'd been able to address all your questions tonight.
Now I know why that little stool was there. Thank you, Lucy, and obviously with the 4th and with the 11th and the 18th, there'll be plenty of opportunities. I want to thank all of you for staying 2.5 hours. Please, please, read what you can, use Renee's blueprint, and also send questions to the school committee, or basically to Lucy and Jake, because there will be these other forum that they will want to hear questions. So I thank all of you for being here. I really hope that we helped, and have a good evening, safe trip home. And the school committee can't leave until we end our school committee meeting. I will take a motion to end our school committee meeting. Thank you, Sarah. That's second. Anybody? I'll take. Kyle, you're seconding. All right, seeing no objection, our school committee meeting is adjourned. And remember, you will be able to watch all of this online and at CTSB. Thank you.